Lions Rock Productions.
Hey, this is executive producer and host of the Break It Down show, Pete A. Turner, and this is our limited series called The Prison Chronicles. Somebody's murdered in the United States every 30 seconds. Convictions for first-degree murder commonly carry a prison sentence of 15 to life. And ultimately, most inmates are eventually released, which begs the question, what condition do we want inmates to be in as they complete their incarceration? If I told you that most inmates walk out with less than $1,000, would you feel positive about their chances of becoming a contributing member to society? What if I told you that number is a lot closer to $200 and less? Now what are your thoughts? Previously on the Prison Chronicles. On September 18th, 1986, between the bells of 5th and 6th period, 15-year-old Heather Dunn walked out of her Spanish class, walked up to her ex-boyfriend, Leonard Rubio, who had graduated the year prior, and seconds later, in front of dozens of her friends, she was murdered. What do you see in the community as far as harm that came from the murder?
Boy, I think the sense of tragedy at the time was palatable. I think that I distinctly remember the family. I remember where they used to live. I don't remember the street, but I remember the little house they used to live. It was kind of on a corner. And I remember shortly after funeral and after all the services and stuff, and it could have been a month or two or whatever, but I remember they repainted the house, and they either repainted it like dark gray or black. And it was just like a cloud. Like that house symbolized the cloud that hung over Benicia because of that event and because of the things that happened on that fateful day.
The reality is, if you go in any inner city where poverty is rampant, the level of PTSD in those communities is unimaginable, and we haven't addressed that. The mental illness, we're not dealing with PTSD, whether it's military veterans coming back or whether it's kids who've been in a neighborhood where many young people have been shot. I encountered gun violence very early on. My oldest brother was shot in the neck, by my brother. I was 14 years old, 13, somewhere in there. Childhood friend murdered. 8 men in my family, 8 members of my family have been shot. And that's an American story we don't talk about. To really think about that. My mother has 3 sons, all 3 of us have been shot. My older brother has been shot on 2 different occasions. He's currently paralyzed. I have numerous cousins who have been shot, 2 nephews who have been shot. I have a nephew who's in prison who got shot, and then he turned around and shot somebody. Just repeating the cycle. So that level of gun violence, if I go to my 11-year-old cousin, a 12-year-old cousin, and they're walking down the street carrying a pistol, I'm not surprised that that's a life choice they're making.
Now, once I got out of prison, I had these principles in my mind that were instilled in me as a young person, never snitch, never work with the police, that kind of stuff. You know what I mean? Always stay true to the game and true to the neighborhood. These were things that were told to me and that I saw reinforced with the behavior of a lot of other people around me, and so I felt like, I had to live up to that same thing.
And so I had that knowledge that this is what, AJ would go for that. And that just enhanced my psychology and my disposition, my casual indifference. Retaliation is a must. I heard that repeatedly, and it burned into my brain. Retaliation is a must.
These are the Prison Chronicles. As we continue our story here in episode 3, it's really an addition to part 2. In this episode, we're going to feature Richard Bronson, Ron Self, and Matt Ray's path to prison. And they'll talk about what life was like leading up to that. Now, Richard Bronson's first. You'll remember he was convicted with the Wolf of Wall Street brokers from the Stratton Oakmont firm. He compares his white-collar crimes and his path to prison to a kid from the streets. And just for the sake of clarity, during Richard Bronson's session, we also have Dr. Richard Ledet, who's my research partner for all of my combat work and my peer-reviewed articles. And Richard are both in this one. Hopefully that clears any kind of confusion. I wanted to ask a little bit about, prior to you going to jail, Richard, can you describe a little bit about your life? Because one of the things we're trying to illuminate is what is it like? Because what we've found is most people don't say, hey, crime be damned, I'm going to do this anyhow. It's a series of choices, and you sort of end up in this place where you're like, yeah, I screw. If once you're able to take ownership of your misdeeds, it's not this thing where people like, oh, I'd love to be away from my family and my kids for the next 20 years. It's something different. Yeah. Can you kind of give us an idea of what your different was?
Yeah, you're right. It's not like going to Club Med where, you're taking separate vacations from your wife and your kids. I never came across anybody who preferred being in jail or prison. It's a joke when you go to prison. I spent time in jail too, so I had both experiences. You go there, and every single person there is innocent, literally. And I'm sure, Richard, you've had that experience. If you ask anybody, they're innocent. They're either innocent on a technicality. In other words, it wasn't 103A, 17th Street. It was 103B, 17th Street, and therefore they were innocent. Or, they had it in for me or whatever. Or the best one is, it's not my obligation to pay taxes. It's not the Constitution. I'm right. You're wrong. So clearly there's 900 of you who are right, who are here in prison as a result of that. I was wrong. I knew it when I was doing it. I knew it when I was waiting to get caught. I almost wanted to get caught because it was hanging over me. It was being in that roller coaster as it slowly inches higher and higher and higher, and this is going to be bad, but at least let it happen. Let me hit the apex and start going down. And that's what I look for. I knew I was wrong. I have no excuse. I'm not saying that to make me sound better. I think it makes me sound a lot worse. I was greedy. I was stupid. I was impatient. And I worked on Wall Street. And I told myself everybody else did it. But what the fuck does that mean? Everybody else did it. Everybody's going 100 miles an hour down the highway. That doesn't make it's still a dangerous thing that you're involved with. And I was going 100 miles an hour down the highway. So in any event, for me, going away was almost a welcome event. It was one I knew was inevitable, and I just wanted to kind of gain absolution. I thought I could, at least, by going through the process. It didn't really provide me with that. I paid everybody back long before. I did my time. It's now 25 years since I did the things I did that got me in trouble, and I still feel as guilty, and I still beat myself up as much as I did when it first happened. That's my reality. That's what I got to deal with.
You've done your time. You paid people back. Now that you're out, you've got a second chance. Expand on second chances.
The truth is, we talk about second chances when they get out, but for most of these men, and there's far fewer women who are incarcerated, but for most of these folks, they never had a first chance. So the idea of a second chance is such a misnomer, and it suggests that they blew that first chance in some way. I blew a first chance. They never did. They never had it. They didn't have it culturally. They didn't have it. They had no context. Their parents weren't around. Their parents weren't an example. Their friends weren't. Their idea of success was the guy they saw on the street who had the nice clothes and the jewelry and the cars and the good-looking women. That was their idea of success. Where I grew up, it was Porsches and it was gold Rolex watches and it was cocaine. And that was my idea of success. But they're both distorted perversions that really have nothing to do with what, we ought to be aspiring to as human beings. So I don't think they're any better or worse than I am for the direction they took. I just had the trappings, of civility around me that they didn't have. It's amazing when you cut through all the crap and you just are dealing with each other, which you do in prison over time. You eventually get to know people inevitably. And it's amazing how wonderful some of them are and how much jerks others are. They're human beings. There's no difference. There's absolutely no difference.
One of the things that I've tried to force myself to see in combat zones and other places too is, would I make better decisions given that person's situation? And I've learned that I can't. I can't reliably say that I would have done something different if I grew up in whatever, Harlem, fill in the blank bad neighborhood. But as a society, we seem to put that on the people that have the least amount of advantage. It's
much more convenient. It's facile for us to think in a binary fashion that it's us versus them, good versus evil. The universe is far more nuanced and subtle than that, and morality certainly is. And Dostoevsky and great writers have written about this, our capacity to do wrong and whatever. And anybody, forget about even are they capable of it? Who among us hasn't had an extra glass of wine or an extra beer and gotten behind the wheel of a car? And there, but for the grace of God, there's been 1,000 times that I could have hit somebody or hurt somebody. And what business person, I don't know a single one that wouldn't, occasionally take a personal dinner or a vacation and, call it a business trip. So they get caught, they go to prison. They don't get caught and they're respectable. It's never that nuanced. I mean, yeah, I'm sure there are some psychotic people who commit crimes. I don't know what to do with them. Throw them out of a window for all I care. They're bad people, but there's not many of those. In fact, it's just people who are victims of their circumstance, and they're just behaving the only way they know how. And that's all. If they're guilty of anything, it's they don't have an imagination. They're just following what everybody else is doing. You want to lock somebody up for that, that's fine, but it's easy to think that that's the reason because that's them and I'm me and never the twain shall meet. But I'm here to tell you, it's just not true.
Now we'll check back in with Ron Self. Ron's background includes military school as a child. He deployed and displayed his bravery any number of times, but in particular, early in his career, he helped rescue a bunch of fellow Marines from a fiery helicopter crash that had a number of fatalities, and leaves a mark on him to this day. He also was a Force Recon Marine. For those that don't know, there are no better warriors in the world than Force Recon Marines. He's the kind of guy you want on your side in a fight. He was built to be a warrior from a very young age. And again, Dr. Ledet joins us in this interview. And just for a point of clarity, Ron talks about being 100% service connected. This deals with us veterans. When you have a injury that comes from service, you're given a percentage. So Ron says he's 100% service connected. That means that the military has determined that his disability level is 100%. Doesn't mean that he can't walk, doesn't mean that he can't work, but it means that there's enough injuries to enough body parts that they recognize that his service damaged his body, and he gets extra medical care and funding for that. Give us your background, Ron.
So at 6 years old, I was enrolled into military prep schools as a result of going to live with my grandparents. So from that age on through college, up to the age of 22, I was doing military school, and then the formality of boot camp at MCRD San Diego in 1987. And I stayed in the Marine Corps till 1997. Shortly after that, I went to prison.
2 questions. What got you on your military path? And did you deploy as a Marine?
I'm a combat veteran. I served in multiple areas of operation, AOs, from 87 to 97. I'm 100% service connected today. So my childhood, an event that happened when I was 6 years old, the military, and then prison, I think they're clearly linked. It took me a decade of some pretty deep introspection to identify what that link was, to gain the insight into my actions and behaviors from my childhood that really drove me when I was in the Marine Corps. I really excelled because of certain things that went on in my childhood. Unbeknownst to me why I was excelling, I wasn't any more brave or heroic than anyone else, but I took a lot more chances and risks, not really knowing why.
Sounds familiar.
Which also led to prison. Yeah, which led to prison. Yes. When I lost the emotional anchor that was the Marine Corps, I attached to something else and someone else. And that became a driving factor. And in trying to help that person, I went to prison for 23 years.
You talked a little bit about you lost that emotional attachment to the Corps. I can certainly understand losing emotional attachment, and a lot of people crawl into a bottle, and that's one way that they cope. What have you seen, and how can you speak? What can you say to that?
Well, I actually I did a TED Talk when I was at San Quentin. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that. So in there, I speak a little bit about combat and the bond that's created. That is, I'm not a parent, but I've had conversations with many guys in my unit that were parents, and they all conveyed that the bond between our brothers in combat was greater than that between them and their children and their wives. And then when that bond is gone because those guys are dead, or they took their own lives, they died in combat, or they took their own lives, there's this big gaping hole that can't be filled. That's one component that I've recognized. Another component is that adrenaline rush, that feeling, never having felt so alive as when you are in combat. I mean, you guys know what I'm talking about. You've seen it. The air is crisper, the sky's bluer, the grass, you've heard it all. Mm-hmm. And it's true. I mean, at that moment in time in your life, you've never been more alive than in combat. And some guys seek out, they try to find another window to that feeling. And it leads to very risky behavior. Driving down the freeway, maxing your car out at 200 miles an hour just for that thrill. Riding a motorcycle recklessly just for that thrill. Getting involved in criminal activity, drugs. Guys, they chase bottles, they stick stuff in their veins, up their nose, looking for another porthole to that experience. And the reality is you're just not going to find it, and you can't go back to where you got it. I mean, there's days where it's taken 2 or 3 days to come down from events that took place. You're just so emotionally adrenaline jacked up. And when you do come down, you crash hard, because when that adrenaline is driving you for that long, when it stops, but that euphoria, that sense of, and when just, it's actually hard sometimes to articulate and capture, give that feeling accurate articulation.
How do the dudes who go out on patrols, how do they deal with being locked up?
2/3 of the veterans that I ran into in that time were Vietnam era veterans. Mm. Now, put into perspective, when those Vietnam era veterans came to prison, back in those days, prison was it was survival of the fittest. It was gladiator school in all respects. And so for the Vietnam veterans, when they came back and they went to prison for various reasons, the brutality of prison back then mirrored the brutality of Vietnam, and they thrived in that environment. They found a place, so to speak, and the place that they found in prison, they could not find in society. And that, I think what I'm trying to get at there for many that I've encountered, you come back from Vietnam and, 24 hours later, you're at a 7-Eleven buying a Slurpee and someone spits in your face. Yeah. Well, yeah. There's going to be a reaction when you come back from a place like Vietnam.
Yeah.
With that, today's soldier and Marine and Airman and Navy people, what I saw, a huge trend that I saw, and it was very disturbing. There was a huge flux of Afghanistan veterans, Marines, Army, and whatnot coming into San Quentin when I was getting out, and they all had traumatic brain injury. They all had mental issues. Mm-hmm. In relations to IEDs and bombs. And coming back stateside, I mean, over there, it's not a question of if you're going to get blown up, it's when. Sure. It's a crapshoot. Every day you're rolling out waiting, right?
Yeah.
So these guys come back now and they get on the freeway and someone brakes on them. They ram them, get them the hell out of the way, or they do some evasive driving up the side of the road and around the road, and just all kinds of crazy shit that's just not acceptable in society.
Yeah.
Now, over there, it's going to save your ass from getting blown up.
You're working in a combat zone going on. Rich and I went on combat patrols every single day. So these are the things, and I guess we're spending time illustrating this because I want the audience to understand that this is part of the cost, like this TBI, the bombs that have gone off. And you said it's not if, but when. So before I got to my assignment where I ultimately worked with Rich, like right before, very short amount of time, they blew up a place called Fob Smart. And Rich and I walked through. The blast was so strong, it folded Connexes, metal shipping containers. And then what, Rich, within a couple of months of leaving, Ann Smedjinghoff, same camp, same place, Ann Smedjinghoff and a patrol were a lot of them were killed and blown up. So inside a very short amount of time, one camp, and while we were there was a what they call blue on green violence, where an Afghan shot an American, and Rich and I had to decide how. Every day we walked around with Afghans who had guns, and we had guns, and we were warned: make sure you have one in the pipe, make sure you're ready to shoot, because these guys are.
Yeah, even while we're at the gym,
yeah,
trying to relieve some stress. I mean, I hear these stories. I made a conscious effort not to be in public. I basically had to isolate myself from everyone else. I only drove at night as much as possible because nobody else was on the road for all these reasons that we're talking about. And this is the kind of stuff that we're trying to help the audience understand, because it's things like this that, back in the civilian world, there's a lot of things that people just don't understand for people who are trying to make their way back in. And as we're trying to figure out what to do with veterans who find their way incarcerated, this is part of the story that we got to understand, because there was something that put them there in the first place. And that's some very important context, Ron. So I thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, and there's a lot more even to that, what put them there. It's an interesting fact that I don't know if most people, and this is in California, veterans do almost a third more time than anyone else as far as civilians for the same exact crime, primarily or solely because they're veterans. That's empirical fact.
Wow.
The VA's collected that data. So a veteran and a civilian commit the same crime. The veteran's going to do a third more time because he's a veteran.
Why the penalty? What is it? Do we just go the extra mile and commit that much more of a heinous crime? Is it? I know it's the same crime, but sometimes there's like a level of amplitude.
Because you're supposed to know better. You're trained. My crime was technically attempted murder. That was not my intent. I was able to prove that, which is why they let me out. Mm-hmm. But for attempted murder, I got 32 to life.
Right.
And there are guys that have first-degree murder that get out in 16 years. I was a veteran, and not only that, because of what I did in the Marine Corps, because of the unit I was associated with and other units that I was associated with, Raid Company, Recon, Force Recon, JSOC, blah, 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 doing these different things, TAD. Because of that, they nailed me to the wall. And I can't say I don't blame them in my case. What I did, I needed to go to jail. And again, I don't have all the answers. These are I'll use the I statement, my feelings, my observations that I've encountered, is that there's a naive expectation among society that military people come back and they can just assimilate back into society. It's like a light switch. They should just, they're trained. They should know better and they should be better. And it's just not how it is. When you experience mild combat, sustained combat, or even no combat, just seeing guys go out and not come back, it changes you. I think my experience is it changes you fundamentally at the core of who you are as a human being. I mean, you're existing outside the societal construct. You've seen the darker side of humanity in the human heart. And to come back here and everybody's just doing their 9-to-5 job, walking their dog, flipping you off on the freeway, doing whatever, just completely unaware of what's actually going on in the world. It's hard, I think, for people to even understand a lot of veterans.
Talk about rehabilitation and redemption.
I truly believe everyone is redeemable. And I could give you a comparison, so to speak. So I was basically trained as a boy I was a boy soldier, right? I was trained as a child, albeit through American morality, to behave a certain way within the military. Let's take another example of a boy soldier, Africans. What goes on there where these clans go into villages. They take all the boys between 6 and 9 and 12. They kill all the older men in the village, and they rape the women to death in the village. They're called rape rallies. I was involved in an operation where our order was to stop the rape rally and do it with extreme prejudice. Back then, I believed wholeheartedly that if anyone ever needed killing, it was the individuals that were doing these rape rallies, these boy soldiers. When I look back, how arrogant is that of me?
Yeah.
Because look what they went through.
Yeah.
They didn't just decide we're going to grow up and start raping and killing people. They were kidnapped from their villages. Their mothers were raped to death. Their fathers were killed. And they became what they became. They weren't innately evil human beings. Just like I'm not an evil human being, but I was trained a specific way Luckily, over here in America, right, where my morals were a little different, much different. They weren't. But I believe every one of those men now, when I look back, I believe they were redeemable had they been given the opportunity, had they been taken out of that environment. I believe at the core of what they are, I think all human beings are redeemable and all human beings are good. We're products of our environment, just like a pit bull that gets trained to be a fighting dog.
And finally, we're back with Matt Ray. If you recall, Matt shot 2 people, killing one of them, and did over 20 years in prison. Let's hear Matt describe his path to prison.
Matt, can you just give us a sketch of what it was like to be you growing up, and as you look back, illustrate what you experienced?
Yeah, sure. So I guess if I go back the way I've worked things out, basically going back to my earliest memory, childhood, growing up, we lived in Paso Robles. It was a country setting. At that time, I had 2 sisters and myself. I'm the only boy, second oldest. My dad and mom weren't getting along, and she ended up, they separated. He moved, so we were there by ourselves. My mom struggled to make ends meet. She had to work 2 jobs. She was a waitress. So a lot of times we would be in the house alone. You know, it's not like times today where you worry about that stuff. We had, we're in the country, we didn't have too many neighbors, but it was safer then. So I guess she felt like it was okay. So a lot of times before her other shift, she would check on us. Maybe we'd be asleep or whatever. And then sometimes the neighbors would check on us. What ended up happening was the father of across the street from us ended up molesting myself and my sister, then his own children. I found out years and years later. And, it was just something that I never talked about, never discussed. I actually kind of just blocked the whole thing out of my memory, I guess. Just kind of just shut down mentally. It wasn't until years later, I was about 11, my dad was going to reconcile with my mom. So we moved from there and came up to Fairfield, where my dad had a good job. Tried to make things work, and he ended up having an affair with somebody who later turned out to be my stepmom. So my mom felt like, I can't take this, I'm leaving. So she took my sisters and moved across town, and she just felt like I needed to live with my dad. Well, that's how that went. There was a point when that memory resurfaced, when I recalled what had happened. And from that point forward, looking back, I could really see where I was getting in fights in school. I was angry. My grades were bad. I was just abusing marijuana, like 12, 13 years old, started drinking, getting disciplined, and a lot of stuff that nobody could figure out. I was asked later. They found out about this guy, and I denied it. I was ashamed. I just kept it a secret. So going through the juvenile hall system and getting in fights and getting arrested, I ended up going to Boys Ranch at 17, got out at 18, tried marijuana, cocaine, and I just couldn't do it. It made me really paranoid. So I turned heavily to alcohol at that point. And so that was my drug of choice. I just drank, till I black out. And I guess I was just really just overcome the past that I had, remembered.
You're angry, you're fighting. What kind of reasons would you fight for? Like what would cause you to want to go after somebody or get into a confrontation?
So many of the situations that I found myself in were people that would bully somebody, people that were getting over on other people. I'd place myself in the middle of those situations. Somebody that seemed like they were trying to bully somebody, I would get involved because I had all this anger and I didn't like that. So if it was somebody I knew or somebody I was close to, I was always, volunteering to fight somebody. That was my way of releasing all that was inside of me, all the anger that I had. Because once again, I never talked about it. I never got help. I never admitted it. So the whole time I'm running from it. So I'm just drunk and I justified it, like thinking that it was somebody that was hurting like me or whatever the case. I would just figure, may the best man win type situation. Neither one of us were going to call the police on each other. It was just a situation where you're fighting. That to me was my outlet. I didn't go and rob people. I weren't just somebody randomly. It wasn't like that. I still had a conscience. I still was a good person. However, I had this issue deep inside me that I never talked about. And so that was the way I justified it to myself. I was like, hey, he was looking for it. I gave it to him. And that's the end of it, and I'd move on until the next confrontation. In my mind, I was thinking that, I wasn't doing wrong, which I was, but that's the way I convinced myself. I didn't lose too many fights. There was times that I did, but, it just came with the territory. But most times, I don't want to say win, because today I can look back. Physically, did I overcome someone? Yeah.
With your level of anger, Did you have any control at all?
I was out of control with my anger, and the dangerous part was I didn't give myself any other option. You know, there was nothing like now. I know there's so many different directions I could go. At that point, backing down wasn't one of them, and losing wasn't one of them. That being the case, that's what made me so dangerous because, you know, I carried a loaded weapon, but I convinced myself that I'm a good person. I'm not going to use this if I don't have to, unless I'm defending my own life. You know, I bought it legally. I had to go through the waiting process. At that point, I didn't have any felonies on my adult record. So I went through the 10-day waiting period, and, you know, it was all legal, but it was illegal to carry a loaded weapon. And so my train of thought was, you know, I'm a good person. I'm not doing anything wrong. I'm not robbing people. I'm not stealing. As long as somebody doesn't try to hurt me, you know, and that's the thing. It's weird how it translated into the physical side of it as a 6-year-old into an adult, you know, young adult, that I convinced myself that no one's going to put their hands on me, not in any way, even though it wasn't a sexual way, period. I'm not going to be vulnerable. You're not going to hold me down. You're not going to hurt me. You're not going to. So I really kept replaying this message in my head that no one's going to put their hands on me. And if you do, you better look out. That's what was so dangerous. So that's why I say autopilot, because it's like I already knew what I was going to do before it even happened. Is that I left myself no other option. And I really thought that, you know, I wouldn't have used that gun unless my life was in danger. And that's not what happened. And alcohol is a part of it, but I don't want to use that as an excuse.
Sure.
You know, I was carrying a loaded weapon, and when you carry a loaded weapon, you're prepared to use it, whether you say it's for self-defense or not. That might be true. But underneath all of that, the fact of the matter is, if you're carrying a weapon, then you're prepared to use it. You're prepared to use deadly force. And then whatever circumstances arises, then that's, you know, the direction that it's going to go.
Were you capable of thinking about the consequences and that you might spend your next 25 years in jail?
Never. No, I wish I would have. I wish I would have been conscious enough at that point. And I can't, you know, I don't want to blame it. Once again, I don't want to blame it on alcohol or even my past. It's just at that point in time, you know, that was part of the trial. Was there a cooling off period? It was 9 minutes from the fight to the shooting. They figured, but the whole thing is, are you acting under that provocation? Under that heat of passion? Are you acting under that? And the answer is yes. You don't have somebody that a gash over their eye almost swole shut, witnesses saying there's blood all over and looked like he had a broken nose, which isn't justifiably, you know, the reason to kill somebody. Right. But obviously I was acting under that provocation. You don't drive up to 55 miles an hour in a grocery store parking lot, zigzagging across, hitting your brakes, screaming at people that have nothing to do with it, that I had no reason to believe would know what I was talking about. And I'm saying, where the fuck did they go? And I'm yelling and I'm peeling out, and I'm, you know, it wasn't like I was ambushing or laying in wait, which they tried to say in the very beginning. I mean, I'm not trying to hide. I'm very much obviously furious, and I'm looking for somebody. So I'm not making any excuses up, but I definitely didn't have the appreciation at that point in time to think that when I do this, someone's going to lose their life. I wish I had, because it would have never happened had that been the case.
As a young guy who's full of rage, were you interested in off-ramps to do something else? Were there people offering them to you? Did you have a mentor? Any of those things?
I did have opportunities, whether it was through the court system, whether it was through court-ordered counseling at the time when I was at my dad's as a juvenile, maybe even counselors here and there, even in the group home that tried to talk to me. But the thing was, I was in denial, you know, so that's a tough thing when you don't accept, you know, what's going on and accept the responsibility. I was still playing the blame game. I was still blaming the victim. I was blaming my dad, mad at him because he left us and this happened. So I was still blaming. At 16, I was arrested for brandishing a sawed-off shotgun. A friend of my dad's was getting into a fight, and I was with the same person on this night. And it was a big fight, and I jumped out, and then weapons were pulled out. So I went and ran to the car and took this, you know, the sawed-off out of the car that I carried around. To answer the question, I guess, like I was already on this path. This was something that was going to happen, and only because I couldn't, or I didn't get the help. I failed to acknowledge what was going on. I just, like, whatever it was inside of me, I couldn't admit what happened. I was embarrassed. I was ashamed. I was angry. I was blaming. So all this stuff was going on. So as hard as it is to say, it happened to this family on this night. But had it not happened to them, it was going to happen to somebody else's family. And it was because I was in these rages, and I was always drunk and I was carrying a weapon. I mean, it was just the recipe for disaster. It was going to happen. And so I did have opportunities to get some help. I remember my dad brought a guard from San Quentin over that was a family friend. And he said, son, I'm just scared to death that one day I'm going to be turning the key in your cell. And his name was Daryl. And I said, Daryl, you're crazy. I'm not going to prison. But everybody could see it, but I couldn't.
Yeah.
I was on this path. And so I did have opportunities, but something within myself, I just wasn't willing. I wasn't ready. I didn't have the tools. I wasn't capable at that point. And so it just went the direction that it went.
Did you feel like you had a hopeful future during this time? Like as you're growing up, your late teens, you've had a lot of trouble. You've had this damage that you won't accept. But did you still have hope that like, hey, I'm going to go become a whatever?
No, I didn't have any vision for the future. I didn't have any really self-worth or, self-esteem. I didn't feel very valued. I had love for my mom, but I just think whatever I lacked and the anger just overcame everything. I wasn't looking that far ahead. I was involved with drugs. I became pretty large drug dealer at that time. And I wasn't thinking about the future. I was just thinking about fast money, fast life. And the danger wasn't even something I was scared of. I mean, I put myself in, crazy situations where I could have been killed, a dozen different times, and it didn't work out that way. But it's just something that I just kind of became numb to. I wasn't afraid of it. It was just part of living, but I didn't have any positive outlook or future plans. I didn't think about, what was I going to be when I get older, or should I go to a trade school, or should I go to college? I was just, I'm making too much money doing what I'm doing, justified me doing it, and I just continued.
Can you describe what day-to-day life was then, like in those 6 months leading up to the murder and the assault on the other person?
My life was drinking every day. My life was selling drugs. My life was carrying weapons, fights leading up to that. Just probably 2 to 3 weeks prior to this incident, somebody jumped on me, and I ended up leaving the scene and coming back with a gun. I look back on that now, and I know that I would have took his life had he been there when I got back. But at that time, I didn't have my gun. And so it was in a different car. So I went and got it and came back. And I think back, after I was in prison, I look back on that time. I was like, wow, that's a trippy, scary path that I was on, because I was convinced that's what I was going to do. It was like, that's how my mind was working at that time. It was like, the last thing you're ever going to do is put your hands on me. And in this night, involving myself, although I don't want to say start the fight, but I had every opportunity to not run over there, but that's not who I was. At one point I was saying, I just went over there to back my friend up. No, I went over there to fight because that's who I was. And that's just my whole outlook on it. It was like, it didn't matter how many people there were. If it was me and him against 5 people, like I said in the past, or 2 people or 3 people, it didn't matter. It's just what it was. You didn't really think about it. And that was the dangerous path.
Next on the Prison Chronicles, does the punishment part lead to someone coming out with a less likelihood for recidivism?
It does not. I think that anyone who's capable of the punishment itself being enough to instigate change for them, they were already in a decent household.
3 years into my sentence, I ended up stabbing an individual in prison and getting sent to Pelican Bay State Prison. And, Pelican Bay at that time, I don't know what it's like now because I'm not there, but at that time was a really, really violent and crazy place to be. It was the worst of the worst. Everybody there on the yard that I was on had 100 years to life, 3 life sentences. I mean, nobody was going home. Nobody really, gave a damn about nothing except prison politics on the yard.
having clarity about what I had done, how I felt I had brought shame to the men that had died, how I had brought shame to the Marine Corps. I handled everything inappropriately, and I spent my whole life training to help those that cannot help themselves. In an effort to help someone, I did it in the most inappropriate way. And for all of us, both of you included, at one point in time, we were trusted to carry a weapon in defense of this country, and I violated that trust. I want to try to get that trust back. I realize I never will, but I can spend the rest of my life trying.
The Prison Chronicles is a limited series from the Break It Down show from executive producer Pete A. Turner. Hey, we release 5 new episodes a week of the Break It Down show, aka BIDS. It would be awesome if you liked, shared, subscribed, reviewed. Those things always help us out. There are quite a few people to thank and give credit to, including co-producer John Leon Guerrero, who hosted, edited, and directed the music for the series. Also, co-producer Tony Alvarado, who took all of the disparate interviews, exploded them into 1,000 pieces, and put them back together as the writer of the Prison Chronicles. The show is associate produced by Dr. Richard Ledet, my field partner in Afghanistan. He helped us work on the research questions and understanding what work is being done academically in the prison systems. He's also a host on several of the episodes and a guest. Music is provided by Eric Stenglin, Hell Nasty, Dylan Sitz, Cushy, Faison. Also, John did some of the music himself too, so he deserves an extra hat tip for that. As always, I want to thank my producer, engineer, editor, Damian Georgiev. And of course, I want to thank all of our guests. There is so much wisdom and power in all of their experience and work, and I cannot say thank you to them enough. Thank you, all of you. If you have comments, suggestions, or just want to get in contact with the show, feel free to email me at pete@breakitdownshow.com or hit me up on social media at Pete A. Turner on all platforms. Thank you again. We'll see you next time.